The night the barn nearly burned down, I thought for certain it was a sign from God. The air was heavy with the scent of summer hay and kerosene, and the dry wind off the Kansas prairie carried sparks faster than a body could blink. I woke to the crackle and glow, pulled from my narrow bed by the shouting of my father's voice and the frightened whinnies of our horses. Barefoot, hair tumbling loose down my back, I ran out into the yard. And for a moment it seemed as though the whole world had turned to flame. I remember the sky more than anything, that awful sky streaked red as if the stars themselves had caught fire. My little brother Henry, just 12 and wild-eyed, was running with buckets from the well, sloshing water across the yard. My father barked orders, his voice harsh and commanding, and my mother knelt on the porch steps, rosary beads slipping through her trembling fingers as she prayed aloud. "Clara, get the horses out." Father roared at me as if I had been born to obey, and so I ran into the barn with smoke stinging my eyes and fear clawing my throat. I freed the gelding first, slapping his haunch so he bolted out into the open, then tugged at the halters of the others until the barn was half empty. My sister Lillian appeared in the doorway, her pale hair gleaming in the firelight. A hand pressed delicately against her lips. "Clara, you'll choke in there," she cried, her voice as sweet and useless as always. But she didn't come closer. She never did. By some miracle, the blaze was beaten down before the whole place went up. Buckets, sweat, and shear will save the barn, though the roof would never be the same. When the last hiss of steam rose from the blackened beams, I collapsed on the grass, chest heaving, lungs raw. Father clapped Henry on the back for his quickness, kissed Mother's hand for her prayers, and when his eyes landed on Lillian, he gave her a look of pure devotion, as though she had kept the fire from spreading with the sheer beauty of her presence. No word from me, not a glance. That was always the way of it in our house. Lillian, the cherished one, with her porcelain face and fine-boned hands, born for drawing-room admiration, and me, the one who worked with calloused palms and sunburnt cheeks, the one who slipped into shadows without anyone noticing. But that night, I felt the shift in my bones. Something had changed. Something would be demanded of me. It came 3 days later at supper. The smell of scorched wood still lingered in the yard, but my father's eyes were bright with talk of opportunity. "The letter came," he said, stabbing his knife into the roasted chicken. "From Montana. Daniel Callahan expects his bride by the end of the month." The words fell like iron. We all knew what they meant. Lillian was promised. I glanced at my sister, waiting for her to blush prettily or lower her lashes with false modesty. Instead, she set down her fork, lifted her chin, smiled with a sharpness that pricked me to the bone. "I won't go," she said. The room froze. My father's hand went rigid on the knife. My mother's lips parted in shock, and Henry stared with a boy's greedy curiosity at the storm about to break. "You will go," Father growled. "It is arranged. The man has land, cattle, a fine house. You'll be provided for." "I will not," she repeated, her voice high and cold. "The frontier is dust and hardship. I'd wither there in a month. If you care for me at all, you'd never send me." It was then she looked across the table, her eyes landing on me like stones. "Send Clara. She's the one who belongs in dirt and sweat. She could go unnoticed, and Daniel Callahan would never know the difference." The words scalded, though she smiled sweetly as she said them, as if suggesting I take a second helping of pie. My mother gasped. Henry snickered. My father turned to me with that hard, appraising look I had known all my life. "It would keep our promise," he murmured, already convincing himself. "It would save our honor." I felt the air drain from the room. My fork trembled in my hand. "You would have me go in her place? Pretend to be her?" "It is settled," Father said, his voice final. "No," I whispered. "Not settled. I will not live a lie. But what choice did I have?" Father's will was iron, and the shadow of shame heavier than any yoke. By the end of the night, I found myself in the parlor with the letter spread before me, reading the neat, careful script of a man I had never met. Daniel Callahan, a rancher, a war veteran, a man seeking not beauty, but partnership. His words were earnest, full of longing for a wife to stand beside him in the harsh Montana wilds. They were not the words written to my sister's soul. They spoke to me. And that terrified me more than the fire had when the morning of my departure came. I packed a small trunk with plain dresses, a shawl, and my mother's silver locket. Lillian swept into the kitchen in a gown of blue silk, kissing me on the cheek as if bestowing a blessing. "Do try not to shame us," she whispered. "Remember, you're me now." I wanted to strike her. Instead, I held my head high and stepped into the waiting wagon. Henry waved. My mother wept. Father nodded once, stern and satisfied, and so I left. The stagecoach was crowded with men who smelled of sweat and tobacco, and one red-faced woman with 3 squalling children. Dust coated everything: my skin, my hair, my throat. By the second day, my back ached and my lips cracked, but I kept my locket clutched in my hand and my eyes on the horizon. At night, when the coach stopped at way stations, I lay awake on narrow bunks, listening to coyotes howl, wondering what kind of man awaited me at the end of this road. Would he see me for who I was? Would he cast me out? Or would he look into my eyes and know that, plain as I was, I had a heart strong enough to endure this wild place? The thought burned in me like that fire in the barn, dangerous and consuming. But this time, there would be no water to quench it. By the 5th day of the journey, my bones felt as if they had been rattled loose. The coach lurched over rutted tracks, every jolt reminding me of how far from Kansas I had come, and how much farther there was yet to go. I had counted the miles in silence, lips pressed together, unwilling to show weakness before the strangers sharing that cramped box of wood and wheels. At night, when we stopped at crude stations with sagging roofs and barking dogs, I often sat apart from the others, staring into the flames of campfires, my locket warm in my palm. I told myself it anchored me, though sometimes I feared it only tethered me to a life I could never return to. The smoke clung to my hair. The cries of coyotes sounded too much like laughter carried on the wind. One evening, an older woman named Hester, traveling with her widowed daughter, leaned toward me. Her face was lined from sun and sorrow, her eyes sharp with pity. "You're going to him, aren't you?" she asked softly. "To who?" "To the man. They always send girls like you west for men who have no wives." She reached out, touched my wrist with rough fingers. "Don't lose your heart too quick. Out here, a man can look steady until the storm comes. Then you'll see what he's truly made of." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I was not some girl sold off to a stranger. But the words stuck. Because wasn't that the truth, after all? By the time we rolled into Helena, Montana territory, the air was different, crisp, thinner, the bite that spoke of mountains near and winters cruel. My heart thundered as the coach ground to a halt, dust swirling about the wheels. Passengers disembarked in a rush of boots and skirts. I lingered, palms damp, breath shallow. He was there. I knew before I saw him. Tall, broad-shouldered, standing a little apart from the crowd as though the space itself belonged to him. His hat shadowed his face, but when he lifted it, the late sun struck across strong features marked by weariness and scars. His eyes, gray as weathered steel, found me at once. I stepped down, clutching my trunk so tightly my fingers ached. My heart wanted to flee back onto the coach, but my feet betrayed me, carrying me toward him as though drawn by some invisible tether. "Miss Whitfield?" His voice was low, steady, though not unkind. I swallowed hard. This was the moment, the choice that would mark every day after. My sister's name balanced on my tongue, ready to betray me if I let it. But the promise I had made to myself flared in my chest. I would not live a lie. "I'm Clara," I said, forcing my chin up. "Not Lillian. My sister." She wouldn't come. She sent me in her place. His eyes did not widen. He did not curse or turn away. He studied me as though weighing every word, every flicker of my face. The silence stretched, brittle and suffocating. "I see," he said at last, voice clipped. He lifted the trunk from my hands as easily as if it weighed nothing. "You'd best come along. We'll talk at the ranch." And just like that, he turned, expecting me to follow. I did. My feet dragged at first, my breath shallow. But something in his back, the rigid line of it, the unyielding pride, compelled me onward. I had faced fire, betrayal, and endless miles of dust. I could face this too. The wagon rattled out of Helena, wheels biting into the dirt road that stretched toward the horizon. I sat stiffly beside him, hands clasped tight in my lap, while he guided the team with steady skill. He asked nothing, spoke nothing. Only the creak of harness leather and the distant cry of hawks filled the air. The silence cut deeper than words could have at last. Unable to bear it, I whispered, "If you wish me gone, say so. I'll find my way back. I won't hold you to a promise never meant for me." His jaw tightened, gray eyes fixed on the trail. For a moment, I thought he might leave me at the next crossroad. But then he said quietly, "The prairie doesn't forgive broken vows. Neither do I. You'll come to the ranch. Then we'll see. We'll see." The words were neither mercy nor rejection, only a sentence hanging over me. My throat closed, but I nodded. It was more than I had expected. Less than I had hoped. The land unfolded around ooze-rolling grass, wild and untamed, dotted with cattle and fence posts. At the horizon, the mountains rose like jagged teeth against the reddening sky. It was beautiful in a way that hurt, vast and merciless, as if daring me to survive. When at last the ranch came into view, I drew a sharp breath. A long, low house of timber and stone, corrals filled with restless horses, barns sturdier than anything back home. Fences stretched like ribs across the earth. It was not grand in the manner of cities, but it spoke of labor, of a man's blood and sweat poured into soil his home, his life, and now somehow mine, as the wagon rolled to a stop. A ranch hand emerged from the barn, a boy, not much older than Henry, all restless energy and quick smiles. He tipped his hat to Daniel, then stared too long at me, curiosity plain in his eyes. "This is Eli," Daniel said curtly, helping me down. "He works here, ma'am," Eli said, his grin quick and eager. I nodded, but my heart raced, unsettled. It was not his smile that unnerved me, but the flicker in Daniel's eyes as he noticed it, the slightest narrowing, a shadow of something sharp. Possessive, perhaps, or simply wary. Either way. I understood in that instant life on this ranch would be no easier than the miles that had brought me here. And my true test was only beginning. The first night I spent beneath Daniel Callahan's roof, I lay awake listening to the silence. It wasn't the silence of Kansas, where crickets sang and neighbors' voices carried across the fields. This silence was heavier, deeper, broken only by the lowing of cattle far off in the dark and the restless creak of the timbers as the wind pressed against the house. Every sound seemed to underline how far I was from everything I had ever known. The locket lay warm in my palm, but it did little to ease the throb in my chest. I thought of my father's hard eyes, of Lillian's mocking smile, and wondered what they would say if they could see me, now an imposter, in a stranger's home. A woman who had spoken her truth and yet still lived in borrowed shoes. I rose before dawn, long before the house stirred. The kitchen was cavernous, smelling of wood smoke and iron, the kind of place where meals were made to feed men who lived their lives under sun and dust. I busied myself with bread and coffee, wanting to make myself useful, to leave some mark other than the awkwardness that hung between Daniel and me. When he came in, hat still on his head, he paused in the doorway, watching me, as if measuring my worth with each movement of my hands. He didn't speak at first, only poured himself coffee, and stood at the window. His gray eyes distant. "You didn't have to rise so early," he said finally, his voice low. "I couldn't sleep." He nodded, nothing more. His silences pressed on me harder than anger ever could. As the days unfolded, the ranch revealed itself piece by piece. The land was vast, a sea of grass rippling under endless sky, broken by stands of cottonwood and the distant blue shadow of mountains. Every task demanded muscle and endurance: hauling water, mending fences, cooking for hands who came in with dirt ground deep into their skin. I worked until my fingers blistered and my back ached, but I found a strange satisfaction in it. Out here, no one praised or scorned for beauty. The land cared only for labor, yet the loneliness clung like dust. The ranch hands were polite but distant, except for Eli, whose easy grin and careless words followed me like shadows. He was younger than Daniel, perhaps 20, with restless energy that made him reckless. He carried buckets for me, fetched firewood without being asked, lingered too long in doorways. It was harmless at first. But I felt the weight of Daniel's gaze whenever Eli's laughter carried too close. One evening, neighbor Martha Givens came by with a basket of preserves. A widow with a back as straight as any soldier's, she carried the kind of wisdom that came from loss. She sat across from me in the kitchen, sipping coffee, her eyes sharp. "You don't have to prove yourself every hour of the day," she said, as if she'd plucked the thought straight from my heart. "I do," I answered. "If I don't, what am I here for?" "For yourself," she said simply. "A man may own land, but no man owns your spirit. Don't let the silence fool you. Daniel's watching, weighing, waiting. He's seen enough pretty lies to crave something true. You give him that, he'll never let go." Her words lit something in me, a fragile ember of hope. But with hope came fear, for hope could be burned to ash just as easily as barns. The weeks grew harsher. A storm swept down from the mountains one night, rain lashing the earth until creeks swelled and fences splintered. When a flash flood roared through the valley, we raced to the lower pasture where cattle bawled in terror. My skirts dragged heavy with mud, but I waded into the water without thinking, reaching for a calf trapped against a fence. The river pulled hard, cold as knives, but Daniel's hand closed around mine, steadying me. Together we hauled the calf free, and for one breathless moment, his eyes locked on mine with something unspoken, something fierce and undeniable. Then the current surged, nearly taking him under, and I screamed his name as he stumbled. We fought the flood side by side until the last of the herd was driven to higher ground. That night, as we sat dripping and shivering before the fire, he spoke at last. "I never wanted Lillian," he said hoarsely. "I wanted a partner. Someone who'd stand when the storm came." His words cracked something inside me open. I could not meet his eyes for fear he would see too much. But not all storms came from the sky. The drought followed, cruel and relentless, baking the land until the grass curled and the streams shrank to dust. Whispers in town grew sharper about the Callahan bride who was not the sister promised, about my plainness, my unworthiness. I bore the stares, the laughter behind hands, until the day Daniel stood in the general store, slammed his fist against the counter, and declared in a voice that silenced the room, "This woman is mine by choice and by truth. I need no other." His words burned hotter than the summer sun. For the first time, I felt chosen, not substituted, but shadows lingered. Eli's smile soured, turning watchful, bitter. I caught whispers between him and strangers by the corral, words I could not hear but felt in my bones. Betrayal hung in the air like smoke. Then came the fire. One hot afternoon, lightning struck the prairie, and within moments, the horizon was aflame. The wind carried sparks faster than we could chase, and the herd bellowed in terror. Daniel mounted his stallion, shouting orders, and I seized a pail, running alongside men twice my size. Smoke blinded, heat seared, and suddenly Daniel's horse reared in panic, throwing him hard against the ground. For a heartbeat, I thought him dead. I didn't think. I ran into the inferno, lungs screaming, skirts ablaze at the hem. I dragged him by the shoulders, inch by inch, until we broke through into clearer air. His eyes fluttered open, gray and glazed, and I pressed his hand to my chest. "You're not leaving me," I whispered fiercely. "Not here. Not now." We saved what we could, but the land bore scars that would not heal quickly. And in the ashes, something darker stirred. One night I woke to the crack of gunfire. The shadows of men on horseback sweeping across the yard, rustlers. I seized Martha's old shotgun from above the mantel and fired into the dark, the kick nearly breaking my shoulder. Shouts rang out, bullets splintered wood, and I felt fear coil cold in my gut. But I stood my ground until Daniel staggered out, rifle in hand, blood still bandaging his brow. When dawn broke, the truth came out. Eli had guided them, his jealousy festering into treachery. That night, beneath a hard white moon, Daniel faced him in the yard, revolvers drawn. The world seemed to hold its breath. Eli's hand trembled. Daniel's did not. My scream split the silence before the shot could fall, and the sound of it, my terror, my pleading, was enough. Daniel lowered his weapon, eyes burning. "Get off my land," he told Eli, "and never return." I watched the boy who had once smiled at me slink into the dark, and I felt no triumph. Only sorrow for what bitterness had stolen from him. The ranch lay scarred, but still standing. Daniel and I rebuilt with blistered hands, brick by brick, each stroke of the hammer a promise we did not yet have words for. When he finally asked me to marry him in the little clapboard church, Martha tucked a silver comb into my hair, her eyes shining with a mother's pride. On the morning of our vows, a letter arrived from Lillian, bitter words written in a neat hand, claiming I had stolen what was hers. Yet between the lines lay the truth: she had married a banker back east, gilded and shallow, and still she found herself empty. I folded the letter away, and when Daniel took my hand at the altar, I knew no one could take what we had built. Days later, I sat on the porch with mugs of coffee, watching the scarred land slowly green again. When the rains came, wildflowers sprang where fire had burned, stubborn blossoms defying the memory of ash. Neighbors who once whispered now nodded with respect, and I felt the weight of belonging settle on my shoulders at last, at night. When the lamps were low, Daniel would turn to me, his voice rough with feeling. "I never wrote to the wrong woman, Clara. It was always you." His words were a balm against every wound, every doubt. We were both scarred by war, by betrayal, by fire, but together we healed. One evening, we rode to the ridge where the world stretched wide and endless. The sun dipped gold over the horizon, and his hand closed over mine, strong and sure. In that moment, with the prairie breathing around us and the future wide before us, I knew our love was more than survival. It was defiance, resilience, a choice made and remade with every dawn. And for the first time, I felt not like the sister left behind, but the woman chosen forever.